Hey there guys, this is Victor with Victor JKU, and we're back for part 4 of the front tube flare build that I have going on for Project Vector. Today, we're going to be getting into the paint process for the front tube flares. Let's get into it. Alright guys, so I wrapped up matching the passenger side flare to the driver side flare. I have them both out here on jack stands right now. I also cut my fenders to match the profile of the tube flare so that they fit on without any issue, interference, and they have a pretty consistent gap along the entire perimeter. And then I also have swapped over from the Nutserts to Weld nuts on the body here so that I will have a little bit stronger and a little bit more reliable mounting surface back to the body with my tube flares. I got a lot of feedback from Gary from Northwest Jeepcast. Really good guy. Met him a couple of times, been to a couple of his events, and he gave me a call and gave me a whole bunch of feedback on stuff that he's done on his build, and he's been Jeeping in his JKU since 2010, 2008, something like that. So he's definitely got some long-term experience with rib nuts, and I'd be a fool not to listen to that advice. So I decided to go ahead and replace all of them with weld nuts, and I think this is going to be really good. So high level, what I'm going to do, and I'm not going to cover this too much, I'm going to go ahead and sand down all the paint. I'm going to go ahead and do spot priming on any raw metal surfaces. Then I'm going to go through and I'm going to coat it with white and clear coat it after that. And then the next thing that I need to work on are going to be the fender panels. What I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be taping a line that's going to follow this body line here that I created. This is going to be black. The rest will maintain the white. I don't need to touch up the paint on this, but I do need to hit where I trimmed the fender just to protect it from rust and corrosion. And then we have the fenders. So the fenders are going to require a decent amount of work, more so than what the inner fender is and what the fender panels are going to. Basically what I've already started doing is using my Makita Orbital sander and a 150 grit sandpaper. I've gone through and sanding everything down, gives it a little bit smoother of a texture, takes down the high spots a little bit, and it's getting rid of any weld spatter very effectively, so it's just making it a good platform to be able to start working with. What I'm going to be doing is I'm going to start with priming. I'm going to use a glass filler to fill some of the larger voids in the material. I'm going to sand that down. I'm going to use a polyester filler to do the fine touches and fill in any smaller porosities. And then I'm going to be coming back and I'm going to be hitting it with black Rust-Oleum. And then what I'm going to do is the top portion is going to be Raptor liner. So basically from this edge around to the bottom side of the tube. I think that's going to give it a nice look. It's going to match with how I've done my front and rear bumpers, just to kind of match everything together. And I think it's going to give it a good consistent look all the way around. And when I eventually get around to doing rock sliders, I will do the same thing there. So I'm not going to go through and show you guys step by step how I'm going about this. I'm not a paint guy. I'm not a bodywork guy. I'm just kind of doing this stuff, and I learned a lot from how I did the rears, so hopefully I will improve on the fronts. But ultimately, this is just my process that I'm going through, and I highly suggest you guys look into, do some research on how to go about doing any bodywork and painting yourself. And I'll just kind of show you guys a few steps here along the way, and then we'll show you guys how it all turns out. Alright guys, so I just finished up sanding everything down that needed to be sanded. I masked everything, and I also wiped it down with acetone, so we're ready to paint. I have the entire Jeep masked off. I just have the portion that I want to paint exposed. I also have my fenders masked on sawhorses, ready to go. And then I have my fender flares set and ready as well. So I'm only going to be painting the mounting surface and the insides for tonight. And then tomorrow we'll be working on a few other things, and then we'll work on getting to the outside. So I'm going to go ahead, get set up for paint, get all my PPE on, and then I'm going to get to painting. Alright guys, so we just finished up painting and clear coating both the inner fender structure as well as the fender panels. So let's go ahead and take a look at how those guys turned out. So basically what I did here is my coat of primer, and then I did 3 coats of Rust-Oleum white and satin finish. 2 light coats and then 1 heavier coat, and then I finished off with 3 coats of Rust-Oleum's crystal clear enamel, 2 light coats, and finished off with a little bit more of a wet 3rd coat. And that's what kind of gives it a little bit more of a glossy finish. There are some imperfections on here as well, but for the most part, it all turned out really good. And the parts that are really of concern for me with what I want to make sure have a good finish is going to be this lower sill portion to about here, because this is all going to be exposed before the fender comes down and where the tube fender flare is going to be. So this lower portion, and then right here, as well as the underside here. You'll also be able to see some of this front portion as well. So I just want to make sure those are the really good points. But I figured, let's hit it all, let's all do it right, and make sure it looks good. So both sides look very similar. And then when we're talking about the fender panels, so what I did was I actually did two different colors. So I did white for the edge around the perimeter, and then I did black in the front, and that's going to match off of the black grill that I have, and I think that's going to flow a little bit better. So basically what I'm doing is I have my tape line that's going right along here, and that guy actually carries along into the front as well. So basically all of this lower portion is all black, and I think this is going to look pretty killer. And then otherwise the rest of the edge is white along the entire rest of the perimeter. Did that on both fenders and turned out really good. What I did to divide the line here, because I did both the black and the white at the same time, that way I can come back and do clear coat and I don't have to wait the 48 hours of cure time if I waited for the two to dry separately. And so what I did was I basically just held a piece of cardboard and I would paint the white, and then I would flip it over and I'd paint the black. And did a pretty good job, and I got a pretty crisp line, and there's only a small portion here, so there is a little bit of fade. You may not be able to see it, but I think it's going to look good once we get this all mounted up. So next thing I'm going to work on is, while everything still continues just to cure up a little bit, I'm going to move outside and I'm going to start working on the body filler and body work on the tube flares. So I went through and I applied the glass filler to all the low spots. So what I'm going to do now is I moved outside so that all the dust and everything that's created doesn't get onto everything that I just painted. I got my Makita Orbital sander that I'm going to be using to sand this down. I like to use glass filler first to fill in the larger gaps that way, and then what I'm going to do next is I'm going to go ahead and apply a polyester fill to fill up any of those smaller voids. It's also going to be a little bit easier to sand down as well. So we got the polyester fill applied, it's dry, and it's time to go ahead and sand this down. We're going to do the same thing that we did with the glass filler. Get it smooth, and we'll evaluate what we need to do next after that. Alright guys, so I just finished setting up my paint booth. So this guy is all ready to go. I'm going to go ahead and start getting ready to begin painting the tube flares. Just before this, I finished sanding down the rest of the polyester fill that I had on both flares, and that really cleaned up all of the surfaces really well. There's still a few minor imperfections on them, but I'm not too worried about it because my plan is to use Raptor liner on the top surface. All the imperfections are up on the top, and I think that they're actually going to get covered up pretty well. So they're very small little things, so we're gonna go ahead and run with it. So the next thing that I'm gonna do, and this is a takeaway learning experience from my tube flares that I did for the rear, is that I have areas that are underneath the tube that I couldn't get good enough paint coverage in there, so water gets in there, it'll corrode, rust will form, and then that water will be rusty water, it drips down and stuff, and so I don't want to deal with that again. So what I came up with is I decided to go with some of this black seam sealer. It's a SEM product, and the product code is 29392. So basically this is a very similar product to what they use for sealing body seams in automotive applications. And so I figure this will work out really good. It can be applied directly to metal, but I already have my primer down. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to basically work along inside, and I'm going to fill in all of these, and then I'm going to come back and I'm going to do my paint job. That should prevent any of that rust issue that I ran into with the rear flares, and should improve the paint coverage for these guys. And then we'll get ready to start priming and painting. Alright guys, we just finished applying the seam sealer to all the inner corners on the tube work where it meets the outer skin, as well as the mounting face. So we're ready to go ahead and start painting again. So the seam sealer can actually be painted immediately, and it must be painted and top coated within 24 hours. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to lay down another coat of primer on both of these on the underside, and then I'm going to move over into the black paint that I intend on having the underside painted, and then we'll finish off with a clear coat. So we finished up painting the inside of the tube flares as well as the mounting surface on the backside. So what I went ahead and did is I let this all dry overnight, and now what I've done is I've laid down tape, and basically what I want to do is I want to protect the inside from getting any overspray from the primer I need to apply on the outside on the top surface, as well as while I'm rolling on the Raptor liner on the bottoms of the tube, it might want to drip down and land on the inside, and I don't want that to happen, so that's what I'm doing here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this outside. I need to scuff the surface where the clear coat is and the fresh paint is, so I have a good bonding surface for the primer. And then what we'll do, once we're done with doing a coat or two of primer, we'll go ahead and move on to applying the Raptor liner. Alright, so we got everything painted. I have the Raptor line applied to the fender flares. The front fenders are done. I have the new hood latches installed on them, along with the new side turn indicator as well. And then I also have the inner fender structure painted. Everything has had about 2 days, at least 48 hours, a little bit longer for some components, to be able to cure up fully before I'm installing all this, because one thing I've run into in the past is if you don't give it enough time for everything to fully cure, when you go to mount things and if you ever remove them, the paint will pull off. Also, when you're installing any fasteners, sometimes if they spin a little bit, it'll pull the paint and it's a real nightmare. So I want to make sure I give everything plenty of time to cure up before we go ahead and get installing. But with this, I am ready to go ahead and begin the installation process. So I'm pretty excited for this, guys. So I'm not going to walk through all the steps, but there are a couple of things I'm going to highlight. So over here, I have a couple of pins installed into the riv nuts. And basically what the purpose of these guys are is to help install the tube flares, because they're about 30 pounds a piece. And trying to hold it in place and align your bolts and get them to seat really sucked, at least for the take on and off before I had them painted. And since everything's painted now, I don't want to scuff up the paint job, so I want to come up with a good solution. So these pins, basically what they are is a long bolt with an unthreaded shank, and I cut the head of the bolt off. That way it's just basically a dowel that I can slide the tube flare directly onto. That will support it until I install a couple other bolts. I'll remove those and I can fasten everything in. All right there. And so with those guys in place, I can just let it sit and rest. And then what I can do is I can go ahead and start installing some fasteners around them and get those guys started. And then I can go ahead and remove the dowels. All right, so I got enough fasteners in. I'm gonna go ahead and pull these guys out. All right, just easy as that. And it all came on super easy, which was nice. I didn't have to worry about scuffing up the paint, damaging anything. So that worked out pretty killer. All right, guys, so that gets the tube flare installed. It is super rigid, and I really dig how it looks with the contrast of the black on the white. And next step is to bring in the fender panel. So I'm gonna bring that guy in next. Now, the thing to note on this guy is that you gotta make sure that these plastic pieces are lifted up, and I also have my ARB compressor bracket that comes over here, so it's gonna have to get lifted up while I install this. I also have my A-pillar mounted lights along with my GMRS antenna that I have to keep in mind that I make sure that those get routed correctly through this. So I'm gonna go ahead and bring in this guy next. And then in this process too, I need to make sure that I connect my side turn indicator, and I'll go and tuck that guy back away so he won't bunch up. So everything is lining up well, everything's fitting as expected. So I'm gonna go ahead and start bolting it in. All right, guys, there it is, completed package. I am absolutely loving the new look. So basically what I finished up after reinstalling the fenders, I installed the rock sliders, I installed the Evo Mini splash guard, and then I reinstalled the cowl and all of my lights and antenna. And that is gonna wrap up this project. This was a huge project for me, so it started off with just creating the tube flares, which then moved into have to modify the fenders, and I knew that was gonna happen. I didn't know that ultimately I was going to also require the hood latch to be switched out and modified as well, but able to get that figured out. And then also adding in the Evo Mini Splash Guard. I painted that white to match the rest of the body. So I'm thinking the flow of everything with the Jeep now is just looking really good. So that's going to wrap up this series on how I went about building my front tube flares. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this series, and if you enjoyed this video, definitely hit the thumbs up button. Leave any questions, comments, or other feedback for me down in the comments below. For those of you that are returning subscribers, I really appreciate you guys supporting my channel, and if you haven't already and you enjoy the content that I'm uploading, please hit the subscribe button. And also please share this on any social media platforms that you guys use. It helps grow my channel. So with that, guys, we are Victor Vector JKU. We're taking on this build and the trails, both direction and magnitude. All right, guys, have a good one. Catch you next time.